Good morning, GS. How are you doing this morning?
Carrie, I feel great. I'm glad to do this with you, and I love this thing that you and I have been cooking up and creating offerings for men and helping them develop their capacities for their groundedness, but also their skill in relationship. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
I am so excited. Thank you so much for saying yes to both this as well as also coming and working with our community.
Hmm.
So thankful that you said yes and that you're coming and that we're going to be working together, hopefully
Hmm.
on an ongoing basis.
Exactly.
My name is Carrie Arlah Burr. I'm co-founder of Breath+Oneness in Capitola, California, which is a wellness studio where we have regular weekly classes as well as special events, including GS and things like GS. But there's nothing actually quite like GS and what you're offering to our community. Hence why I reached out and why we're just so thrilled to have you coming to work with us. Can you speak to yourself just a little, introduce yourself to us, please?
Yeah, just so your audience can get an introduction to me, I'm an author and a men's coach. And I wrote two books for men. One is called The Masculine in Relationship, and it really lays out in my worldview, what is a model of masculine groundedness that any guy can embody more of in their life. And it's really exceeded my wildest expectations on people getting excited about the content, and of course the number of books that get sold, because we're tapping into something that is so fundamental. And that's what I learned with all my clients, is like they all, not all, but many of them have very similar circumstances and stories, and there's a very similar dynamic in their relationship. And I've come to believe that it's like we're all kind of experiencing very similar issues because they're the product of a well-known dynamic around polarity in a relationship. It's that masculine feminine polarity. And when there is no polarity, when there isn't somebody taking a masculine pole and somebody taking the feminine pole, a lot of the relationship challenges that I see with my clients start to arise. But when a guy learns these dynamics and starts to embody more of them in their life, they realize their relationship problems just start to magically disappear and things get a lot better. So I'm excited to bring this work to your audience. And then just the second book I wrote is on embodiment, and that's what we're going to do on November 18th is an embodiment course, which is really helping guys ground their nervous systems, which then makes so much more possible in their lives.
Yeah, I haven't personally read that second book yet. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm actually rereading The Masculine in Relationship right now. So I got introduced to your work through a podcast that one of my dear friends sent to me, and I trust whatever she sends is always usually really high quality, like really
Mm.
thought-provoking and speaking to the moment in such an exquisite way. And she sent me one of your podcasts, and it was absolutely that. And towards the end of it, even I was getting chills and even crying a bit because it touched me
Mhm.
so deeply what you were
Yeah.
speaking to. And I have to say, I read a lot. I study a lot. I'm constantly learning relationships, communication, the feminine, like working with woman energy, the masculine. These are all topics that I have been studying for decades and also living and experience, right, in
Yeah.
relationship in my life. And as far as I'm concerned, GS, no one is talking about the things that you're talking about the way that you're talking about them. So I bow to you, whatever you're tapping into here, the experience and wisdom that you're bringing forth. It speaks so deeply to me, and I think to all of us, hence the success that I feel like you're speaking to. So
Yeah.
thank you. I'm so glad to have found you. I'm so glad to be reading your book again. I have all of these
Look at that.
bookmarks.
Look at those annotations.
I know, because there are so many things that I'd love to speak with you about today. And if not today, maybe we can even do a follow up to just talk a little bit, compare notes almost in a way, maybe ask some
Yeah.
follow up questions. There's just so many important points I feel like you name. And yeah, so if it's
I,
okay, yeah, please.
well, I'll just make one short comment, which is what you said is I actually hear that from a lot of women. It's a book for men, but the women get it. And what I hear a lot is, oh my gosh, you've put into words what I've been longing for my man or for my relationship, but I just didn't know how to speak. And so I've heard that message a lot from women, and especially women who are looking for a relationship. Even single women were sharing that experience. And what I tell them is use it as a diagnostic as you choose a future mate. Use what's called the masculine blueprint, which is what the structure of the book is around. Use the 3 elements of that masculine blueprint to really pick your next relationship, and that that seems to be received very well. So it's a very common experience to hear you say that, because I hear it a lot.
I was just having that thought, no kidding, this morning as I was rereading and sitting with the material and feeling into what are some of the topics I feel are super important to discuss
Hmm.
today. And I
Hmm.
felt that myself because I am currently in a space of single, and I absolutely, being single, I had that same feeling of
Hmm.
I can utilize this. This is helping me kind of retrain my brain and even my own ecosystem into what I can be looking for, even right off the bat, what I can be also helping cultivate or co-create or whatever my role in that dynamic is
Yeah.
to really keep these things in mind, which have way surpassed what I thought was important in the past in
Yeah.
terms of the relational dynamics. So
Yeah.
I'm
Good.
right there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd be interested to, maybe this is how you wanted to structure this conversation, but to hear the things that stood out, and we could go into those more deeply.
I do. I want to do that. I also want to hear a little into how you bring this work into the workshop setting. So today I'd love to talk about the book, about topics that are related, that are important to us. And I love that I'm embodying the feminine in the relating,
Yep.
and we can speak to that some, which I'm really excited about. And then, yeah, how does this show up in the workshop setting? Also, hopefully seed even more some future workshops for men and women and couples and relating and this
Yeah.
polarity dance.
Yeah.
So that's my intention for our conversation today. And I do want to say back to what you just said, when I read the book, The Masculine and Relationship, at first I was like, should I be reading this? Is this even like, is this weird that I'm a woman reading this? And I can't even say, GS. I feel like yes, 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 for women to read it. Yes, yes, yes. I actually feel like you described my whole relationship history in this book.
Hmm. Hmm.
I feel like you actually spoke for me as a strong, powerful, also wild feminine woman, like exquisitely. I feel like you spoke for me and for the work also that I feel like the women that I'm in community with, there's
Yeah.
a lot that we're working on together. And I feel
Yeah.
like I felt really well represented in your book. And I
Good.
also felt like you spoke to relational dynamics that I've been living painfully in
Yeah.
the last
Yeah.
decades of my life. And I didn't know how to, I had some feelings about like, oh, maybe this or maybe that, or and definitely the longings I feel like you talk to, like this deep longing for certain things that you speak in the book that I do want to talk about those things. Um, and yeah, so I wanted to name a few of those things because I do feel like it's a little funny being a woman reading a masculine in relationship. And yet I feel like you answered key questions, and which is, how does this work? If I'm a strong, powerful, capable, confident woman, right? And I found these dynamics in myself, yet I'm also doing the work of leaning into my feminine, right? Being softer, being more willing to receive, being more open
Yeah.
to the man in leadership. If I'm doing all this work, how does it work for a man to really be in his strength, to be in his clarity and his like that man essence that is just so delicious, and
Hmm.
yet have that the power dynamic inherent that, and what I was just reading again this morning reiterating is like there is a power dynamic in this that I think a lot of us are leaning into, like, well, what is this? How does it go? And maybe we could even start right off the bat with that, right? That it's not a what you call a zero sum game where,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Even the phrase power dynamic, I think, scares some people because, masculine, feminine dynamics have been power over, the masculine having power over. So that scares people. So let's just start by saying, everybody, let's
Mhm.
take a breath. And we're not talking about power over. I talk a lot about power, not as being control, maybe how it's traditionally been, but invitation. It's an invitation. It's basically, here's what I here's what my clarity tells me is the right thing for this moment, whatever the moment is. How does that land for you? So it's that structure I just used is it's clarity plus inclusion. That's kind of the phrase that I use. That's how I teach leadership. It's clarity plus inclusion. It starts with whoever is inhabiting the masculine pole, which, by the way, my audience is men. So I'm talking to men who want to be in their masculine, who are with women that want to be more in their feminine. That's totally opt-in. We're not saying that's the way it should be. I'm just talking to people that want that combination. So let's get that out, out there right out of the gate. If you in the audience want some different configuration, cool. Just adapt the dynamics of what we're talking about here. But I'm just going to speak for simplicity here. So so the man who wants to be more in his masculine, more in a leadership role, first he has to have a lot of clarity, and a lot of guys have lost their clarity. They've put their radar out onto others. What does the other want, whether it's their woman or somebody else at work, or what does the other person want, so I know how to do that and make everybody happy. That's the problem, and that's the nice guy mentality that a lot of men have come into in our modern world, unfortunately. What I teach men to do is, first and foremost, start to turn that radar inside. So you start to have inner clarity, your inner discernment, your inner wisdom and knowing. Start to listen to that and strengthen that muscle. And then you bring your clarity and you externally express it. And it's that clarity plus inclusion. Like, here's what I think is the right thing to do. How does that land for you? And then you can dial that up and down for the situation. Maybe there's situations where that invitation needs to be a little lighter because maybe you're not quite sure, or it's an area of her expertise. Or there's times when you want to dial that up and just have a strong lead. And playfully, it could sound like, baby, I want you to wear that red dress tonight. I want you to be ready at 7. I'm taking you out. It'll be a surprise. And so that's where you dial it up to a little bit more stronger lead. If there's a situation of danger, it could be like, now, give me your hand. We're going this way. We need to get out of here. Like, those are situations, both playful and emergency situations, where it's very appropriate to dial up the leadership. So there's a whole spectrum of leadership that men can bring, and that's what I'm teaching them to do. That's part of my work, is teaching them to do. And that's what a lot of men have lost. They've gone into that nice guy, well, whatever you want, I'm just an easygoing guy, which they think is a virtue, but it's actually something that really it's quite maddening for most women over the long term. At first those guys seem really easy to get along with, and then at like 2 years into a relationship, she's just like, oh my God, do you have an opinion about anything, or a backbone about anything? And that's when problems in the relationship start to occur. So that's one piece of the work that I do with my clients.
I love that. Can I speak to that really quickly?
Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like you say so many things so kind of cleanly, I feel like, in the book. And one of them is the dynamics of this like nice guy. And I feel like also you speak to like the asshole, or like it's like, I feel like the power over models in a sense. And then also maybe the power under, which might be like the nice guy, which is constantly like subsuming his own will or direction or desire underneath, the woman or whoever it is.
Or the victim, add the victim to that.
Yeah. And what I do want to at least confirm from my experience, from my own, as well as the women that I'm in, community with, is that even though those dynamics might work in the beginning to a certain degree, they are not sustainable as far as I'm concerned. And I feel like that based on that, my pool of wisdom, like they're not sustainable models. So even if we're initially drawn to the man who has that really strong independence, who like knows what he wants, and he's, moving forward, he has just such a strong, clear masculine, if it isn't inclusional or inclusive, if it isn't connective, it isn't actually all these other things that you're describing in the book and in your work, it does not last. It does not, it can't, because we are relational beings, especially I find women, if we're really in our feminine, we are relational at our core. We are constantly feeling and in a sense, just like, I don't feel like we even mean to, and yet there's almost this constant subterranean litmus test of like, oh, where's our relationship? How's our relating going? How's our connection feel? Right? How's it feeling to me? And I feel like both these weird power dynamics, the nice guy as well as the power over or power under, I think doesn't work in general at all, whether it's for men, for women, whoever is in that dance. I wanted
Hmm.
to say one other thing too, that when you said that, and I'm glad you said that, because I do feel like that's one of the things that we're in right now as a people is, and especially as men and women, is there is a lot of pain. There is a lot of like historical yuck and like ow, right?
Right.
That we're having to heal at this time.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to name is that I feel personally like power is something we choose, period, as individuals. Man, woman, masculine, feminine, power is an innate quality that we are, that we have, that we can reside back in. And it's something that even if I'm choosing to be with a man who's leading me well, or maybe not so well, I'm still in my power. That's not anything that I'm ever like giving away or giving up. I'm
Yeah.
constantly and always in my power. And there's this beautiful like leading following, dynamic that between two people who are in their power and their choice and their love, hopefully, I feel is like a really gorgeous thing. So
Yeah.
that's, do you have, yeah, anything with that?
Yeah. As men, we want to not uh, force you to follow us. We want to inspire you to follow us. We want to evoke your surrender to our lead, not surrender your sovereignty. No, we're not talking that big. We're just in this moment. Will you surrender to my lead? Is the unspoken question in the air, and we want to evoke that. And so, yeah, it's a great distinction that you make, that difference between power over versus something more inclusive, and that's what I want to show men is possible, how to inspire and evoke these ways of being in their women.
Yeah, I love it. It's such a beautiful marriage too. And I think it's in our culture too that we talk about nice guy, bad boy, right? And I've also seen it in myself, this like going almost back and forth, right? The
Yep.
nice guy gets just too flat over time, too just there's no polarity, there's no spice. And so then you go to the bad boy where there's all sorts of polarity and spice, and yet the relational connective pieces seem to be
Hmm.
missing. And then it is also like the power over dynamic a lot of the time, which is not attractive in general. I love, it seems
Yeah.
to me that what you're naming is this really amazing way to bring it all together, where you're a strong, clear, directional man that has a lot to offer, that has a lot of like purpose and things to provide and offer for a woman or the woman. And there's also that connective quality that I feel like we're looking for in the nice guy. The
Yeah.
connection,
Yeah.
the willingness to be in actual real relationship.
Yeah, and this is the core. What you're talking about is this artful blend of power and relational capacity. And this is what I teach. I call it relational masculinity. It's not toxic masculinity. It's not alpha masculinity. It's sure as hell not nice guy or kind of this new agey bullshit, faux masculinity. This is a man that is grounded in himself. He has clarity. He has power. He knows how to take care of those around him. And he's really skillful at the relational aspects, and that relational space between she and he, and which is the we. That's a lot of the stuff that's not often associated with masculinity. So that's why I try to highlight that it's something new. It's an artful blend of both, and I'm trying to highlight that with the phrase relational masculinity. And this is what I teach to guys.
It's so powerful, GS. Thank you
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
much. Are you finding that it's really working in your life and with the men that you're coaching? Is it really creating
It sure as hell works in my life. I can tell you
awesome?
that. I'm with a very powerful woman, and she's got a strong masculine from her dad and a strong feminine from her mom. And so it's a wild ride. And when I bring it, it is amazing. Like nothing I've ever experienced in my whole life. And when I don't bring it, not that it's all up to me, but I'm just speaking to my part, when I'm playing small, when I'm not leading with clarity, or helping her feel safe and being clumsy in that relational space, then things can get intense and scary. And that's the I like to say that's the occupational hazard with being with a radiant woman, is you get both of those. But for all men, if you can learn to build these capacities and harness the dynamics of polarity and emotional safety and relationality, you can evoke the best version of your woman without even kind of demanding that she do anything consciously. You can actually just evoke it through your own way of being. So that's what I try to tell guys is, don't worry about what she needs to do. Like, don't blame things on her and tell her she's got to get in touch with her daddy issues. She might need to, but that's not your job to force her to. You work on yourself, and then you can evoke a lot of you can evoke really beautiful states in your woman just through your own way of being. And I'm working with guys on that every day, and I practice it every day to varying degrees of success.
Mm-hmm. What do you
I do, you know, Carrie, I know you've got another question, but it's what's occurring to me is that since we're putting this video out for people that might be considering the workshop, I do want to backtrack and talk about masculine groundedness first. And how would that be for you?
I was literally going to ask you that. So go.
We're on a wavelength there.
Yeah.
So all of this, we've talked about directionality, we've talked about relational capacities. All of this starts with grounding your nervous system. And of course, that's true for both the men and the women. But I'm speaking to the guys. Men, if you come in and your nervous system is activated and she's, you know, maybe she's sharing something that's hurt her feelings and you get all defensive and again, you're activated, it's not going to go anywhere because you're at that level where you're defending and she's emoting, and it's like you're going to be speaking two different languages. And so that's what this workshop is about, is using these embodiment exercises, which was what I wrote my second book about, and I also have a companion video course that goes along with it. That's what we're going to do in the workshop, and exercises that you'll both practice and learn in the workshop that'll ground your nervous system. And from that grounded place, you operate out of choice and intention rather than egoic defense or your habits or any kind of scripting, that kind of same thing you say over and over in the same way that you react. You're going to operate instead out of choice and out of intention. It's like, how do I want to live? How do I want to be? How do I want to show up for my woman when she's experiencing a lot of emotion? I don't know any guy that would say, oh, you know, I meant to be defensive, and I was. What they say is, man, I meant to be grounded and I wanted to make space for her emotion, but she came at me with that energy and that blame, and I just lost it. So that's what we're going to do in the workshop is spend a lot of time going through what I call my directional energy framework, which is kind of how to embody more directional energy. And then a big component of that is grounding the nervous system. So we'll do a lot of that for 6 or 7 hours on the 18th.
Wow, that's so awesome. So grounding the nervous system, being in the body, being more in the present. How much do you feel, I'm imagining based on what you're saying, that you don't necessarily go into what we might call like trauma responses or like historical, like hence why we would go to the patterned reactivity, probably based on some really not good experiences from our past, right? How much do you feel like, you know, doing the healing work of like clearing historical, say trauma, or so that we can also get more consciousness or resolution maybe from the stuff that has really not been good from our past? Because I'm imagining that's part of what's coming into the present and the reactivity, right? And the blame and the dances we do. Do you go into that at all? Like how much do you bring?
Yeah, I'm not a therapist, you know, a trauma therapist, but that's exactly what we're working on. It's trauma. Like these forms of reactivity always come from trauma. And guess what? You know, for you guys out there watching this, everybody has trauma. It's not just the kid that went through child abuse, physical child abuse. I mean, it's as simple as mom or dad didn't get you quick enough when you were crying in the crib because maybe they're on the phone, you know, with the plumber and you're crying and they didn't get there fast enough. Even that can embed just a little teensy trauma in you. And so we all have trauma, and whether or not you know what it's from, it actually doesn't matter. I mean, it's good to know what it's from, but if you don't, all you have to know is just kind of think of it as a black box. Okay, it's like, I know I've got some trauma, and what that means is I'll have an input in the present day that's going to get amplified, and there's going to be a non-linearity there. And just know that about yourself, even if you don't know what the actual trauma is. But I advise my clients on, we go into the traumas, we do a lot of embodiment exercise to build your capacity to be with your own traumas, which is healing. I teach them there's therapeutic methods like EMDR and neurofeedback and things like that. I have a whole modality that I teach that I learned from one of my teachers about how to speak from those places of trauma in the presence of other, and that's actually incredibly healing to actually really embody, like feel your trauma inside and then speak from that place within the presence of another. I go through this in depth in the online course that I have online that I encourage everybody to check out. But that's a powerful healing modality. So yeah, with my clients, I do a lot of that. In the workshop, we're not going to try to heal your trauma, but we will give you the embodiment exercises that build your capacity to hold and sit with the intensity and the anxiety that your traumas create in the modern day. And that's where the embodiment exercises come in. It just gives you more capacity to be with that intensity and anxiety within you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like we are, and it's like in these romantic relationships, so drawn to people who ultimately we typically share a lot of the same patterning, right? A lot of the same trauma or dysfunction. This has been my experience of the past. And so often when it gets crunchy, then both of us, it's like that triggering comes
Yeah.
up and in. And I
Yeah.
feel like for either and or both of the people in relationship to have greater capacity to be in the present moment, to be working with the like stuff that's coming up, while also really remaining true to the intentionality that we have for our
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's love, greater compassion, like really loving connection, being supportive, like that would be some of the ones that come up for me that I want to stay committed and true to those intentions while at the same time handling the storms that come up, right? So
Yep.
I feel like that's a lot of what you're speaking to, and that feels really important. I do want to name, or just actually maybe this is a question. There are things that you say in your book. Let me see if I can find it really quickly about the masculine and the feminine, and how it felt really even healing to read about the polarity, the difference between the masculine and the feminine, because I feel like so much of my work in this life, there's a lot, right? And one of the main categories is being raised by a super strong woman who is like, feminism and, equal everything. She's in Silicon Valley, just really having to be in her masculine constantly. And so I'm raised by that. That's my model. And so it has been real work, it feels like, especially the last decade or so, the more that I recognize that like it doesn't feel good to me to be in that strong masculine constantly. The more also the more I mature, I'm like, I don't even know if I want to be in that energy ever, really. I mean, unless I have to, I know I
Yeah.
can.
Yep.
And it doesn't feel nourishing to me. It doesn't, I've witnessed it destroy relationships in my life, both
Yeah.
for me and, for the women in my life. So more and more recognizing like, okay, well, what are the differences? What is it to really be in my feminine? How can I cultivate that more for myself? And then it's like, it is this one paragraph you wrote it was actually referring to David Data and the work with him with the polarity. And it said that you say that his lineage taught you something that helped you make sense. He helped you see that the feminine's role is not to figure out how to be less emotional and more rational. It's not to think the way that you think. It's not to keep her word. That's like you, the man, projecting the masculine way of seeing the world onto her. The primary feminine responsibility is to reflect back to you where you're not caring for her, where you're not in your heart, where you're out of integrity, and where you're not conscious or present. And I feel like that landed so deeply for me, and really kind of validated and reinforced what I've been finding. And it felt so good to have it be reflected back from masculine and a man doing that side of the work. And
Mm-hmm.
so is there anything that you would say to any of those pieces?
Yeah, I want to. I'll speak to the women who are listening. It's like we're not talking about you're supposed to be in your feminine. or that you shouldn't be in your masculine. None of that is part of what we're saying. We're making an assumption, which may or may not be true, but it's true for some people, that there's part of you that wants to be more in your feminine. Maybe you've gotten tired of always being in your masculine. I often find women who are in their 20s and early 30s are kind of in that more the go-go mode, and then they get maybe 35 and beyond, they actually start having the same experience you did, which is like, I don't always want to be in this energy. I don't always want to be the go girl.
Yeah.
I sometimes want to relax back into my feminine. And so there's no shoulds here or shouldn'ts. It's an opportunity, if you feel so called, to relax back into your femininity. And part of that is your own work of surrender, of trusting again. And part of that is your man's work, to have the capacity to know how to create emotional safety in you. And I think both sides can contribute to that. And then you have a beautiful capacity to go into that way of being together, where he can step up a little, you can just relax back and let him lead. It's a long road there. He's got to earn it. Through being reliable, through having clarity, through coming through for you, through tracking you, just all these things that I write about that go into building more trust and therefore emotional safety, which is the third pillar of the book. I think I'll just mention this now, Carrie. There's 3 pillars in the book. I call them 3 elements of this masculine blueprint. The first is respond versus react. So we've talked about that. That's largely what we'll do in the workshop is to a lot of embodiment exercises that ground you so you can be more responsive rather than reactive. That's element 1. Element 2 is provide structure. So that's the clarity and direction that we've been talking about. And then element 3 is create safety. And that's physical, financial, and emotional safety. And I speak mostly about emotional safety in the book. And I think that's what we're speaking about here in this moment is, women can learn to trust and surrender, and men can learn to build emotional safety and create that trust through their own actions and reliability and consistency. And so it's a team effort for sure.
Thank you. Yes, that emotional safety piece really struck me. Probably the most profoundly. I feel like everything that you just mentioned, and I might have said this earlier in this interview, and yet I'm going to say it now. There is not a word in this book that was like for me, just to be clear, which I find really interesting, because typically, right, we read things and we're like, well, is that and I think that is just really interesting and profound.
Yeah.
And so I guess I want to say that from a woman that has been doing decades of work, both like in so many different realms of this, and the feminine and the relational and the consciousness and all the different realms, for it to be so congruent with my own findings, I find so remarkable. And I do feel like the emotional safety piece, which is like last but not least of all the things that you just named, right? It's like almost like maybe setting the stage to be able to do that and to really like lead into that, because that is such a huge piece, right? Like, I think for both of us, for the woman who is really doing her best, or not, maybe whether it's consciously or not, to not be crazy erratic, with the emotions just all over the place. Or I find that the feminine, when I'm really working with it, it feels like water. And it's like, who knows where that water is going to go, right? It's like, do any of us have a sense of like where that water is going to, we might have maybe it could go this way, and yet like, who really knows where that water is going to lead? And I feel like for us to really surrender to that deeper impulse, to that deeper flow, which is such a part of our nature, I find, and again, I'm just speaking from my experience of working with the feminine and in a woman body and how these things correlate and work together, that there is such even a scariness to that, for us to be able to even trust and deepen into our own surrender and our own feeling state. It can be so scary because it is wild. It is in a way uncontrollable. It is in a way, right? So even for us to be able to surrender to our own state and nature of that can be so overwhelming at times. And then it comes out of us often so messy and so like, and in this culture where that is not like celebrated and understood, like this is a great thing. And then it's more like, that's crazy. let's be more rational, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And speak to these. Yeah, please.
I want to speak to the word you just used, the C word, crazy.
Yes.
Um, I actually have a whole module in the online course that I mentioned, it's called the Art of Relational Masculinity. And the module is called Decoding Crazy, because crazy is a term that we men use to dismiss. It's a label we slap on our women's behavior to kind of dismiss it, and mainly it's because we don't understand it and it doesn't make sense to us. But when you really start to understand these dynamics of emotional safety, it makes perfect sense. The kind of you made some kind of funny sound effect for it, but those messy expressions which men would label as crazy, they make actually perfect sense when you really know what's happening underneath. And I think that's a really powerful skill that I want to teach men, and that's why I put the module into the online course. Was you don't have to have it be this mysterious thing that you need to just swat away and dismiss, because that's just going to create more angst on her part. Understand what's going on. And when you do, number one, it gives you a little more empathy for it. But number two, it gives you a little more clarity on how to deal with it. It's like, she's coming at me with that energy, and it's not like, oh, you're crazy, go away, don't do this. It's like, she must be feeling scared, or she must be feeling vulnerable, or anything in that realm. Okay, why does she feel she needs more of my presence. She needs more of my attention or reassurance. She needs more reliability, more integrity from me. What's the piece that I could inject in here, or maybe haven't been injecting in, that's kind of causing this amplification that you might label as crazy. So that's a big part of this, is helping guys sort of decode this dynamic called crazy.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you also for helping build this consciousness. And it helps reinforce too, what, again, these paths that I've been finding and deepening into. And yet I have to say, GS, I have not been entirely sure how they do come together. I mean, I have to say that before reading your book, and before I feel like, the path brings us what we need when we need it, in a sense, right? And I feel like your book and your consciousness and what you're cultivating even helps me. And I'm thinking and feeling that then that probably translates, like you said, like I think we're all experiencing a lot of the same stuff. Maybe that also means that for a lot of us, these are some of those what have maybe felt like missing pieces. Like, well, how does all of this come together? Like, if I really am deep in my feminine and I'm doing that well and even skillfully, it's such a different energy than the masculine, right? Like, I can do the masculine. I was taught the masculine. I've got that all day, right? And yet when I go into the more wild, messy, beautiful, juicy, deep, profound, touching, connective, like all of the qualities that the rich, deep, profound feminine brings, it's like, how does that fit? How does that work? And it does get messy. I find that it gets messy.
Yeah. There's no question about it. It's so messy. It's so difficult. Even when there's tons of love there and tons of like really high level work on both sides, it's hard. My woman and I, we still need to work through things. And we've done a lot of work over the years, both of us. And there's a ton of love there. It is messy. And that's what we signed up for. And the problem is, if it's not messy, you're either extremely high level and you've done a great job, or it's gotten kind of flat and boring. That's the problem. Or somebody's given up. That's another scenario where it's not messy anymore, where somebody's just given up. And they either give up by leaving or cheating, or they can give up in place, which is just like, oh, that's horrible for anybody, especially if there's kids involved, because the kids see that shutdown. They see that model of love, which is no love at all, and then just kind of coexistence. And that's always very, very sad when that's modeled for a child. So I say, Carrie, let's create workshops and let's bring people into your center and let's teach them these relational skills, whether it's working with men and women and some of the co-ed work you and I have discussed, or it's like we're doing next Saturday or the 18th, and working with the men, getting them more grounded, creating more possibility and capacity in them. We can do this. you guys work on wellness, and this is what I always say. The number one determinant of your wellness is your relationship. So that's what we're going to work on. So we're going to create a lot of wellness for your community in this work we're going to do.
Yes, thank you. Well, I feel like we've touched a lot on most of the things, like the masculine in relationship, the book, and then what the work is. It feels like these kind of structural pieces, the respond, versus react, the creating structure, which I think is brilliant, by the way. I mean, they're all brilliant. And yet also reading the structure piece, creating structure, or that's the word you use, right? For the relationship, clarity and direction.
I call it provide structure. Provide structure, create safety.
Okay, got it. Yeah, the providing structure piece of it feels also so huge, which to me is like offering options, creating directionality so that so that we're not having to figure things out constantly. And again, I love that you say this so well throughout today. And in general, I would imagine of like, it's your choice. Like none of this is a should or a have to. And yet it is definitely an opportunity, an invitation for us to learn skills, to practice, see what works, see what doesn't work. And I know that I've been really hungry and longing for that piece of it where I'm not having to just constantly make all the decisions, which has been a habit, right? And before I thought it was like I need to or I should, and now it feels more and more like a choice and an option. And then that creating safety or providing safety. What was the verb?
Create safety, yeah.
Create safety. And that was, yeah, financially, physically, and emotionally, right? Are you going to get into any of that and on the 18th, or is it more about the embodiment and the more respond versus react capacity?
Yeah, the 18th is more about the embodiment piece, just because of our limited time frame. I'll touch on it, and all these things are related, of course. The three elements are always intertwined, but we'll focus mostly on the first part. But there'll be a lot of Q&A. We'll have time for Q&A, and we'll talk a lot about create safety. I'm sure lots of questions will come up.
Yeah. Can I ask one last question? So in terms of when the feminine is really what I have determined more and more in her feeling state, and the masculine is much more in like the thinking state. That's what I keep finding, for it to not fight or conflict in a sense, yet somehow synergize, like come together in a way that really works and is beautiful. It seems like maybe you have found that more and more, where instead of like, maybe as a woman, I'm trying to get my man to feel more or something, and as a man, like you're trying to get your woman or me to like think more, what like come to the other side in a sense. Like, have you found where we can actually really synergize, like let's just say you and me in this dynamic, right? Even if we're just like working on a project together, or if I'm really in the feminine, maybe I'm in a really deep feeling, more even intuitive space and state where maybe it doesn't make logical sense, it's just more felt, right? And maybe you or the masculine is in that real thinking space and like making rational clear, and like I find it pragmatic, I find it linear, a lot of like more planning capacity in a sense. Have you been able to find that in working dynamic where it really complements?
Yeah, I there's no should here. Like, a guy should feel his feelings more. I just teach guys like, okay, if you want to be more effective, if you want to de-escalate the situation and get back to connection and rationality, here's what you need to do. And there's a quote from the book: feelings first, facts later. I'm just going to pause and let that sink in. So I always talk about feelings first, facts later. This is not of like, should we be more rational or should we be more feeling? It's just a sequencing problem. We want to be both. There's room for both and a need for both in the world. What you want to do is realize that if she can't hear you with your information and your explanations when she's in an emotional state. It's just like speaking Greek to somebody that only speaks English. You could say it as loud as you want, they're not going to understand you. Be in the emotional space first, the feeling space first. When she feels you with some emotional resonance in that space, which I'll explain in a second, when she feels that emotional resonance with you, then she's going to come down, and then more informational, rational conversation becomes possible. The only thing that she wants from you in that moment of expression And of course, I'm generalizing. So when I say the only thing, and I make it sound like this is for all women, just know that I'm generalizing, and we're talking about 80% of situations. But the main thing, she just wants to feel you feeling her. And that doesn't require you to do anything. It's just like, wow, she's really upset. This must be really painful for her. And just like, just for a moment, just feel that. It's like, oh, my baby's hurting. That's all you have to do. Just be in that feeling space with her. Feel it with her. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to take the blame. And when she feels like she's not alone in that space of intense emotion, then you start to co-regulate her. And that's the number one thing that a man can do in an emotional situation, is just help co-regulate her nervous system and bring down the activation. And then once you do that, so much is possible. That's what I teach to men. Now, it's a lot easier said than done. It takes lots of practice, and even I get triggered. I'm not totally capable of feeling. I get defensive too sometimes. But I also know that it doesn't work, and I know what does work, and that is attending to her nervous system first, and then so much more becomes possible. Everything that you're wanting, men, becomes possible once you do that. And that's the best way I can explain it to guys.
Again, everything I feel like you say and you write, it lands so true for me. So just to add that to this piece, that when you say things like that and when what you write, I'm like, yes, I feel like I have experienced moments of that in my life, and it did work.
Yeah.
In this
Awesome.
other stuff that you say that doesn't work, it's like, yeah, it doesn't on either
Yeah.
part, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah.
today, and thanks for coming. And yes, please, let's schedule even more. And I'd love to do the couples, or work with men and women. That would be so lovely.
Yeah.
Is there anything else for today you feel like you would like to say or share? Or
No, I just say, hey guys, check out the Carrie's website and get signed up for the class on the 18th, the mini workshop. And then also check out my website, check out my Instagram, my workshops. I have a workshop in Mexico happening in March. I've got the online courses, lots of resources if you feel like you're interested in my work based on this conversation.
the workshop in March, can you speak to that? Is that the dark side workshop?
No, you're speaking to the dark sexual energy work that I do. We're going to touch on that. This workshop it's about embodying the masculine blueprint. It is in Mexico, Sayulita, Mexico, which is just outside of Puerto Vallarta. It's on March 15th through 17th. And I am though bringing in 2 feminine practitioners that will practice with us, and actually have a real feminine being in front of you. And we are going to go into a little bit more of the dark stuff and some of like the art of command. That's something that we'll go into in that workshop, and we can kind of have a more in that romantic, sexual, sensual realm, because we have the feminine practitioners. And just before I don't want to scare anybody. There's no touching. There's no clothes are not coming off. That's not what we're doing. It's the energetics of it is what we're practicing.
Well, can you bring some of that to Capitola, please?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah, the dark energy stuff is fun. I've done several workshops on it, and I guess I could just say it, like, we serve men when we do that workshop. Like, they come out of that different with new capacities, because we do some really edgy stuff, and we grow edgy in terms of their own capacity to be with their own anxiety. That's where the edginess comes up in. So yeah, more to come on that.
Awesome. Thanks, GS. Thank you so much. So good to speak with you. Appreciate your work. Look forward to more of these. Thank you.
Me too, Carrie.